For better or worse, the drone industry is tied to the FAA. And for better or worse, one of the greatest voices that the drone industry has is the AMA. Zoe and I talk about that in depth in this episode, and I found it fascinating. I hope you really enjoy it. I think one of the things that I've seen, or at least heard from, other drone pilots about the AMA is that, you've got this mixing of worlds with the AMA where you've got the fixed wing guys and the 3D helo guys, and they're not really hip to drone pilots being on their fields. Now I know that you right now belong to an AMA field, right?
Yes, I belong to an old man club. And I use that term like endearingly.
Right.
It's weird because there definitely is a difference. Like the FPV crowd is definitely younger, or tends to be younger. We tend to be a bit more rowdy. A lot of FPV pilots have their middle fingers up to the FAA, and they don't want to fly within the rules. They want to fly, have fun, because to them and a lot of people, they're not doing anything wrong. I mean, when you fly and you do it safely, I mean, you're not even like walking on someone's property. You're flying
Right.
through it. There's these two mentalities, and it's really hard to get them to see eye to eye within that, even though we both fly for the same reasons, largely. We both get the same enjoyment out of what we're doing. We're just going about it different ways. And I know it's a challenge. Like the local AMA field that I'm a part of, Electric Silent Flyers of San Diego,
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly fixed wing guys. It's mostly old school pilots flying fixed wing, and they have a rotor park, but it's pretty much run down, and no one locally uses it because it's not fun to fly. You don't have any vertical structures. You don't have the same kind of things that FPV pilots really look for when they go out to fly. And so it's one of those things where FPV pilots, this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to work with the group and the field to try to figure out how we can make it better. And this is something I really encourage other FPV pilots to do, especially now with the crackdown from the FAA and all the new rules and regulations. I hate to say it, but rotor parks are going to have to be a thing. To not have to worry about getting chased out of spots, to not have to worry about people putting up no drone signs. Realistically, if we find safe places to do it where we can gather together as a community, and this is what I really like about AMA clubs. They really do kind of make you into a community. Like you show up and there's almost always other people flying in that area, and you get to meet other pilots and get to interact with people that you haven't met yet. Whereas if you go to a field to fly by yourself or fly with a couple friends, your experience is very insular. I've actually really enjoyed going to the AMA field, besides having to fly it, because it's kind of boring still.
Well, you've got, and just so folks know, you've actually got, I think call it Ride or Fly, Fly and Ride.
Fly and ride. Yeah.
Fly and Ride.
Or ride and fly.
Ride and Fly, yeah, you've got that. You actually show the park in there. And I remember, as I was watching that video, I was like, that's when I realized how really good you are, because it was absolutely boring terrain. It was like, wow, this is really great. And then all of a sudden I'm like, God, if I were to go fly here, this would be the most boring video ever.
And this is the biggest thing and honestly, I think the biggest challenge is, one, making space at AMA fields for vertical structures. I mean, if you're flying line of sight, that's kind of your biggest nightmare, is having
Right.
a giant vertical structure in the middle of your flight path. Which is neat, because at the rotor park, the rotor park area is slightly off to the side from the main flying field. In a lot of instances, if AMA fields do it right, they can set up a separate slight area where the drones can fly around and not impede the flight paths of the fixed wing pilots. Realistically, I think that's how it's going to have to be done going forward for a lot of it. Like, there's still going to be open flying. People are still going to fly in parks. It's still going to be a thing. But I feel like the community really needs to have rotor parks. It really will benefit from people getting together at a local community spot and making it theirs and really sharing that with others. When more people do that, I really think we're going to see more people get into FPV and continue to stay in FPV. Because that's one of the biggest things AMA is all about, is helping to get others into it and to provide the environment for you to learn from yourself and others in that environment. That's one of the core concepts of AMA clubs. It's just that AMA clubs have become insular, and we have to kind of poke at them a little bit to let us into their little bubble, which is going to happen. It's going to have to happen. It's either going to happen slowly as the old AMA members die off, or it's going to happen more quickly when they realize FPV is awesome and that these pilots only embolden what we're doing, not, take away from what we're doing. Yeah.
So how would you recommend that? Let's take me, for instance. There's no AMA field around here, at least that I'm aware of. I typically fly either by myself or with my boys, which I have a 12-year-old and 13-year-old, and there are quite a few drone pilots in the area, FPV pilots, and we've kind of self-organized, but it's such a huge area that I live in that we still don't cross paths very often.
Yeah.
How is what would be a good recommendation you might have for a group of pilots to self-organize and also, break in or gain the admittance to the AMA?
That's actually a great question. So there's a couple parts and a couple answers to this. One, as a group of pilots, you can become an AMA club. And it's fairly cheap to do. You basically assign officers and duties to the people within that club. Now, once you're a club, and it's, again, super cheap, and the AMA, you can contact them. They have people on staff that will help you through the process of creating a club. Like, they're super helpful. That's what they're there for. And once you have a club, the biggest thing is finding a flying field. Most counties and most places around the world actually have recreational use leasing and options available to groups to be able to find land at cheap, very, very cheap, to use them for AMA clubs. And for instance, the city of San Diego essentially assigned the land use for the Silent Electric Flyers Club in San Diego. Their group now has a spot that is very, very cost efficient for them to actually fly at. And the AMA also has people on staff to help you through that governmental process of finding a location, of actually talking to your local government and actually having a representative to stand there on the phone with you as you talk to your local representatives to find a flying location. So it's really intimidating to do. There's a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot of hoops, but there's definitely hoops you have to jump through, and it doesn't happen overnight. But in a couple months, realistically, any dedicated small group of people can find land near them and turn it into an AMA club, and be able to do it for fairly cheap. I mean, most clubs have member dues, and the member dues really do help pay for the land use, and that's $50 to $100 a year to have access to your own flying field. And depending on, the terms that you get with the city, you can find a spot that has power, you can get power ran out to it. You can start building structures on it, like dedicated workbenches. Like some AMA clubs have really nice amenities, like the silent or the flying electrons in the Bay Area. Like their AMA club is absolutely amazing. They have power on site. You can plug in your charger, charge batteries, and fly all day long if you want to. And that's a big thing. I mean, I really think if pilots will go out and spend a little bit of time organizing, you can get something great going. And it just takes a bit of motivation and the right tools. And the AMA is there to give you the right tools.
And let's be very clear. The airspace situation in San Diego is a nightmare. Because I'm in a similar space. It's very Navy Air Force oriented. There's no space like
Getting
there's
Lance approval is hard.
yeah, right. And so if you can get approval for land that you can just fly on in San Diego, we could do it here in Virginia Beach, the
Yeah.
Hampton Roads area.
So, an interesting point, and this is really boggles my mind. When the FAA basically forced the new rules and regulations into effect, as in pilots can no longer fly within 5 miles of an airport without using the LANT system,
Hmm.
there's a bunch of AMA clubs that are within 5 miles of an airport. For some reason, AMA clubs like to put their little airports next to big airports. And that created a lot of problems, especially for the local club. For example, when that went into effect a few weeks after that, and literally a week after I posted a video of me flying there, a UAS special agent from the FAA came out to the flying field and shut it down temporarily under the guise of being within 5 miles of an airport and not having the proper waiver signed by the FAA to do it. The club had to have the waiver in the process of being, it was submitted and it was in processing. And it can take quite a while to get approved for it because essentially they have to kind
Hmm.
of change the air map a little bit, and it's like a whole process, and it has to update nationwide. So it doesn't just happen overnight. And to my knowledge, I don't think it's still happened. And so the FAA locally has backed off of the field saying, you guys are trying to follow the rules, you guys are trying to do it right. We're going to work with you on this and not, pester you too much. So yeah, if you're within 5 miles of an airport, you definitely need to have a waiver and work with the local airport to get that set up so they know you're there and that you can use that area without having to get access to the LANT system.
One of the things that, and this is the mentality that has run, at least I've seen run through the drone industry and the folks that I fly with, or that I have flown with, is kind of, I don't know if you remember the old, skate or die, skateboarding is not a crime. That mentality really permeates the FPV groups in general. How much damage do you think that is doing in the eyes of the FAA or even the AMA?
So that's a really loaded question because I've been able to talk to some very interesting people within like NASA Langley, the research center that actually proposed a lot of the new rules and regulations to the FAA,
Hmm.
and then also meeting with FAA representatives. Um, it's difficult because I don't want to say necessarily it's damaged the FAA or what they're doing. It's more or less damaged the FPV community, I think, as a whole. And in a
Well,
weird
that's what
way,
I meant.
because like in a lot of ways, yes, flying again, it's if you do it safely, no one's going to get hurt. If you do it
Right.
the right way, no one's going to get hurt. The biggest thing they're worried about, though, isn't what's happening now. It is the future of the airspace system. And this is something that I've actually had to wrap my head around over the last, like, 9, 10 months, is that it's not that they're worried about things now. It's for when they have millions and millions of drones in the airspace system flying simultaneously in an automated fashion or a semi-automated fashion, and they're crossing traffic continuously. Essentially, the FAA with the next gen system, and a lot of people don't know, the next gen system, or the next gen as they call it within the FAA, is an initiative to overhaul the entire airspace system from drones to aircraft. And it's going to hopefully allow for corridors to be made for human transportation via drone in the future, cargo drones to be able to fly certain paths that don't cross with airliners and other domestic drone travel. So they're really thinking 100 years ahead, because right now we've had basically an airspace system that hasn't changed much in the last 100 years.
Hmm.
And they're seeing this advent of technology and the rise of drones. And realistically, the FAA wants to have this future happen. This is why they're implementing the LANT system. This is why they're implementing other systems in the back end. The FAA is actually testing out a new thing through the SAN challenge. It's called SAFE. It is a system that connects up to a flight controller that actually guides the drone back into safe territory if it gets too far out of the way. So there's definitely things the FAA is doing to try to make sure the airspace is safe. Now, the biggest thing is the conflict with most acro pilots. It's
Right.
like, we want to fly where we want to fly, and we're not harming anybody. And that is a really hard stance to deny. I mean, I'm still of the peace of mind that my tiny whoop, where did I put my tiny whoop? Like, like something this size is not going to destroy an aircraft, right? Like you
Mm-hmm.
can have machinery that is going to be completely safe to the general public and most generally the other drones in the airspace. Um, it's a cultural thing. Like the FAA wants to go into the future. Drone pilots want to be in the present and experience things now. And I don't know how to explain that to other drone pilots. I don't know how to like say, hey guys, let's just get on board with it. The sooner we get on board with the FAA and start working with them, the sooner we can help shape the rules and regulations going forward. If we turn a middle finger to them, they're going to turn a middle finger to us and they're going to regulate us away out of existence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's honestly what scares me, because with the new rules and regulations, they have the ability to essentially amend the rules and regulations at almost any given time.
Right.
So as things continually develop, if things do get out of hand or if that attitude persists, like the special agent that came out to the local flying field, they are starting enforcement. They are definitely adding people to payroll to enforce the new drone rules and regulations. And I saw it firsthand. Other pilots have started to see it firsthand too. It's still
Mm-hmm.
rare, but it is happening. And while pilots may not be stopped now, 20 years from now, 10 years from now, when we have really good UAS detection systems, and I hate to say it, but remote ID is everywhere and pervasive, when they see a drone on their radar that is not ID'd or is flying outside the bounds of it, it's going to be very easy for people to just isolate where that is and come find the drone pilot. While that technology isn't pervasive now, I definitely see a day and age where it will be. And it's a lot better to get on board with things now than to try to fight the system and be completely steamrolled by it.
I don't disagree, and I
I
have
had to eat a lot of my pride to get to that point.
you know what, it if you do take the stance. So like I had a conversation with a Marine Corps commander. So you know, this is a very military heavy town around here, and this particular guy was responsible for, you know, communicating how basically the future of drone use for the Pentagon. And he, you know, he and I had a great conversation about how, you know, they're already starting to go ahead.
I might have met him.
I don't want to name him,
Yeah, probably
just
a good
because,
idea.
yeah. But you know, he had a really, you know, at the time, and this was 2016. This was before any of the new FAA hubbub was going on. He had spent a lot of time. They were laying down rights of way for drones, you know, going over rivers, going over uninhabited terrain, road, you know, relatively uninhabited roadways, railways, to make those rights of way, to make those drone right of ways. That was for autonomous systems. And so to think that us little hobbyists, which we are not a critical mass of people yet, and may never be, we're tiny.
Well, at
You
this
know, I
point,
mean,
no. With all the new rules and regulations, I think we're going to be relegated to a niche. Just by looking at the numbers of new pilots, like talking to pilots that have gotten out of FPV and drones because they don't want to hassle with the new rules and regulations.
mm-hmm.
I think it's still gonna be a niche, much like model aircraft have always been a niche, and that's not a bad thing. Even though I really want to see FPV become a mainstream thing with a tiny whoop in every home, um, I don't know if that future is ever going to really come. And I honestly, before the rules and regulations, I saw that being the case. I saw people seeing this as a new hobby where they don't have to hassle with things. You can fly a tiny loop anywhere and have fun with it.
Hmm.
But even the new rules and regulations, you still have to, like, the tiny loop is not exempt from the Lance system.
Even under
And
250 grams.
that's the current argument. So the registration, you don't have to put a registration number on it, but it's still not exempt from the Lance system and all the other rules and regulations the FAA has created. And that's been a point of contention for a lot of people, and myself included. One of the things that I would really like to see pilots push for, and that I think we can have happen, is that if we start pushing for a sub 250 rule again, where, you don't have to necessarily ID them, you can fly them pretty much anywhere. They're exempt from the Lance system because it's a toy. AKA, if you're living within 5 miles of an airport, you can still fly it in your backyard.
Right.
And then with that, a height rule, basically hobbyists to be able to fly under 100 feet within almost anywhere with, traditional 5-inch machines. Those two things, I feel like, kind of fix most of the issues hobbyists have and would open up the skyways again, and while also ensuring that the FAA can still roll out commercial drones flying a little bit above that and not have the two intermingle. I really hope the FAA will see the error, I hate to say error of their ways, but the error of their ways, and see a better path forward and be able to implement that. For example, New Zealand has a sub 100-foot rule. So if you're flying within 100 feet of a structure or the ground, you don't have to worry about the extra rules and regulations that apply to other traditional aircraft. You don't have to worry about using a Lance system or anything like that. If we had that in the U.S., I think a lot of pilots would feel more welcomed into the airspace, and we can kind of get back to the good times while still letting the commercial interest push things forward. That's my pipe dream.
Well, it's a good dream. I think I share a healthy dose of your skepticism as to whether or not that'll happen in the U.S. But I think the days where we all just go out and fly willy-nilly wherever we want to are coming to an end. And it'll probably take time. It's like you said, but in 10 years, this will be a different thing. So
I'm hoping, because we're still at the very beginning of drone sports. We're still at the very beginning of FPV's history. And I keep likening FPV to video games in the 80s. Video games in the 80s, they had a boom and bust, and the bust happened at the peak of their industry at the time. They had 8% of U.S. households with a video game console in them. They had Chinese cloning rampant. Like, games that would come out with the U.S. would then get cloned and re-brought to the market back in the U.S., undercutting the original creation. You had IP disputes. You had essentially not clones, but copies. Then you had bad hardware, and then QA issues. Games became pumped out so quickly that they didn't really QA the games to make sure they were fun and enjoyable. Much like the drone industry, a bunch of new hardware was pumped out really quickly to try to grasp a market that was growing. And the funny thing is, 8% of U.S. households at the peak of the drone industry back in 2016 had a drone. So the same parallels existed for both industries. And the same thing goes for the manufacturers. There are a lot of manufacturers that were manufacturing a bunch of parts. And then we started hitting a bit of the downturn in the industry, and all of a sudden people couldn't move product like they used to. And then prices started coming down and going down and going down. Then it's harder and harder for businesses to make a profit, so they keep eating out their margins. And then you start having this collapsing effect that's happened over the last year and a half, 2 years, of where a lot of the smaller shops have gone under. A lot of my favorite FPV shops are no longer in existence. You have a few big names in the industry, and even they were consolidating. I mean, RDQ and Rotorai at one point in time, two of the bigger names merging. So it's one of those things that FPV saw a boom and bust cycle. Now, what I've noticed, and one of the things I really pay attention to, are the Google Trends. I love Google Trends. And you can see public's interest in drone racing and drones in general go up, and then you can see it start spiking down. and it's almost gone down at a 45-degree angle since the boom. And we finally hit the point where it bottomed out and we're starting to see normal activity again. And hopefully, my real hope is that we'll start to see slow, sustained growth, because that's what's going to give our industry stability, and that's what's going to allow newbies to get into it and, have high quality product that actually makes sense. Companies will start getting on a release cycle instead of a new product every month, or hopefully it'll be every 6 months, and that product will last, 6 months to a year. Because that's how most products and manufacturers maintain. If you're trying to release a new product every month, it only takes a few of those products to not gain traction to eat away at your capital and cash flow for you to release new products. And it can be a very vicious cycle downward once you get into it. So I really hope the industry is going to be on an upturn. I really think that people, once they find FPV and once they get the bug, it's easier now than ever to get into. I mean, you can go out and get a newbie drone set up for like $200 that has goggles, transmitter, and newbie drone setup.
Yeah.
And it flies amazing. Like, I couldn't get, for $200 when I got into it, I could get
There's no way. Yeah.
Like, you could, it's just not a thing.
That was super deep, and there was a lot of content there that is not typical for this channel or even for the FPV industry in general. But it's crucial that we as a hobby and as an industry understand how we relate to the rest of the world and the rest of the world's airspace. If we don't choose to relate well, if we choose to give the FAA and the AMA and other bodies that can help us out the middle finger, we will be relegated to a very small niche. In our next episode, we go even deeper than we went today, because we start talking about how FPV can be used to combat chronic pain. And I hope that you will join us in that. I'd like to thank my patrons. The link is below. If you like what I do, go check it out. And I'd also like to plug Give Back October. Give Back October is my effort to bring attention to the folks that don't get attention as much as they probably should. The folks that have given their heart and soul and work behind the scenes to make an industry happen that, they don't get the fame, they may not get the monetary reward, but they're still plugging away at it. So Give Back October is for those people, and hopefully will bring some people to the fore that you've never heard of or seen before. I hope that you enjoyed this, and I'll see you soon. Bye.